many feared death as a tower block in West London is engulfed in flames.
The death count has been downplayed by the mainstream media.
They had no sprinkler system, no alarm system that worked, one way of getting out.
Sadness has turned to anger. Tension spilling over into the street.
We should be campaigning to the BBC, who act as mouthpieces for this corrupt government.
It's been 10 days now since that tower block in London was consumed by flames. The fire has had serious repercussions for Prime Minister Theresa May's government, which was barely clinging to power after a very close election and now has its housing and social policies under serious scrutiny as the blame game unfolds. Journalists arriving at the scene got an earful from residents who say that the news media ignored them when they tried to raise their safety concerns until the fire, the tragedy, suddenly made them newsworthy. Those reports of unheeded safety warnings, that cosmetic renovation that used a flammable material because it was a little bit cheaper in one of the richest areas of Europe have turned the charred remains of Grenfell Tower into a symbol of entrenched inequality in Great Britain. Exhibit A in the case against a government accused of failing to take care of its most vulnerable. Are the mainstream news media in the UK any better at dealing with marginalized communities than governments are? On stories where complex issues like housing, inequality, austerity, race, and class intersect? The answer would appear to be no. Our starting point this week is London.
It's the sort of sight you expect to see in a third world slum. Towering inferno, hell on earth, unimaginable scenes in one of the richest parts of the world.
What's shocking about it is about those who are often invisible, poor black and brown people who are the lifeblood of London. Taxi drivers, cleaners, caterers are made powerfully visible through this terrible tragedy.
Around London, we see a lot of these tower blocks. And they remind us of inequality, they remind us of a lot of social issues. So to see one of them burning really, really hit home.
It's a spectacle in the worst possible sense.
Like most news stories, this one was picture-driven. And once the flames had died out, there was Prime Minister Theresa May at a photo opportunity with firefighters looking concerned. She chose not to meet with any residents, victims, until the following day. And when she did, it was beyond the glare of the cameras. May left the building by the side door, was chased, and called a coward. The Prime Minister could have feared the viral moment, the kind of confrontation over issues like neglect, not caring about the poor, that journalists covering the story walked right into.
You didn't come here when people were telling you that the building was unsafe. That is not newsworthy. You come here when people die.
The media has neglected a lot of these stories, and that's where we saw this anger coming from certain people towards journalists, because not only have these issues not been covered, these people haven't had a platform to be heard. So only now, when this huge tragedy has befallen them, do they then get the space to actually talk about what's happened to them? And that should have happened before, when we already knew this was an issue.
I say the media, the mainstream. You don't deserve to be there, do you know what I'm saying? I mean, we should be campaigning not to government, but to the BBC, who acts as mouthpieces for this corrupt government.
And so when the reporters came, kind of invaded the neighborhood, and they wanted to have one discussion about how terrible everything is, they were directly confronted with residents who were very organized, articulate, vocal, saying, no, this isn't simply a tragedy. This was an accident waiting to happen.
I just think people want change. I think people are sick of the establishment. We're sick of the media as well. We're sick of everybody, even you guys interviewing me. I don't trust you. People don't trust anymore.
And then the story came out about how they'd been warning for years about fire safety, and became a story about neglect, but also a story about ignoring concerns.
For many of the residents, they felt the fact that they were ignored was partly down to their race. They lived in the richest borough in Britain. Almost 90% of them were Muslim, they were recent migrants, and they really felt that every time they complained, the impression they got from everyone they complained to was that they should be happy to have a house at all, rather than complaining about fire safety and accessibility issues.
This is not the first news story to receive scant coverage during the pre-disaster phase, where the media have failed to find repeated warnings of imminent danger as compelling as when disaster actually strikes and lives are lost. And as empathetic as most of the British news media were in the aftermath, putting tough questions to the politicians.
You represent your government, you represent your Prime Minister. If I'm in one of these tower blocks, I damn well want a sprinkler system and I want it done immediately.
That empathy seemed to subside when frustrated residents stormed into the local municipalities' offices. And when the most notorious of Britain's right-wing tabloids looked for someone to blame, they looked past governments, the regulatory issues, and all those unheeded warnings to focus on something and someone else, the other.
A lot of people who were living in this block, it seems, were migrants, refugees, asylum seekers. These are people who, by our press, have been consistently demonised. And I think the fact that the media is largely white has kind of eclipsed this idea that is really, really central to understanding what's happened at Grenfell, that a lot of these people are marginalised in society.
The Sun and the Daily Mail have a huge history of very racist front pages, whipping up racial hatred, so I wasn't surprised to see that they had decided to focus not on the fire safety problems, but instead on one person who had a fire in his home. So I don't think that, blaming this man did anything other than scapegoat him to serve the Daily Mail and the Sun's conservative viewpoint.
Well, they're trying to find a culprit, and rather than finding the property company, which has repeatedly failed to listen to all the local communities' manifest concerns over safety, they find a resident who had a faulty fridge. But in the newspaper's editor's mind, they're looking for a culprit, but they're looking for the right kind of culprit, and that culprit isn't going to be anywhere near power. The victims can either be poor victims, or perhaps in this case, they can be culprits.
Grenfell Tower is that rare news story that touches on so many institutions, with governments, housing authorities, fire regulators, and construction firms all called into question. But the residents still have enough anger left over for the Fourth Estate.
I personally think they're just here for the hype. They'll come in, they'll get a couple stories, and then they'll dust off and they won't come back, and there's still going to be problems in the next months to come, do you know what I mean? Probably years, in fact, but they won't be around.
It's frustrating. I go through a range of emotions walking up there. You see this big, massive media truck, and you see the little, the vultures, they're like leeches. I see that media truck and I start to feel anger. It's a bit like going to visit the zoo, isn't it? Or going to visit the jungle, but you go in the safety of a safari truck.
It's just two complete different stories. If you speak to people on the ground, people from the community, and you see what's taking place in the news, it's just two complete different stories. You'll hear the facts and figures from the ground as opposed to the mainstream media.
They just want that juicy story, they just want the views and they just want the hits, but they don't really care about the people on the ground.
Having heard the resentment residents have for media outlets who had ignored their grievances until after the tragedy made them newsworthy, our producers asked them what they made of the mainstream media coverage of the fire itself. Their responses were telling. Many could not answer the question because, they said, they don't watch or read the mainstream media. The news they follow on this story is produced closer to home and consumed on social media.
We've seen social media present a very different picture than the one framed by lots of mainstream newspaper narratives, and it's enabled people to put together a version of events which is much closer to what actually happened, a version of events which shows how responsible the council are, how responsible the property company are for repeatedly failing to listen to all the residents' concerns. You wouldn't have seen this reported in most of the papers.
What's so interesting about social media is its disruptive quality, that residents themselves and through citizen journalists, they're able to tell a different story and a different narrative.
Have died.
Mainstream media, journalists, producers, everyone else should be deeply worried about this and deeply worried about the undermining of trust between them and their readership and their viewers.